Why do you think two young people or another generation is here trying to figure out more about Van Illich? What is your impression on it?
I didn't know that it would be possible. I wondered after the death of Illich, and especially after we had the colloquium, after about 2 years after his death, we had a colloquium in Bremen. And some people thought we should have a colloquium every year, but that didn't happen. So things began to die out. And I wondered, was that the end? Was Illich's influence going to be simply for academics inside in universities studying history, rather than some living contribution to us living today? But then people began to contact me, and some of them are young people, and you are young people, and that gave me hope. And that hope has progressed, if you like, to today, with the two of you coming to see me and to talk to me, and for me to see how passionate you are, even though you never met the man. You just know about him. So that to me is very hopeful for me. I have a daughter who is the goddaughter of Ivan. And after we had a conversation yesterday, I phoned my daughter to bring her up to date, because she was only 3 years old when he died, so she never really knew him. But I wanted to tell her that young people like herself are now interested in Illich, even though they haven't met him. So maybe, I said to her, maybe you too will grow in your interest of him, because he's an influence on your life, whether you see it or not, because of your father. Yeah. And the life that I've chosen, partly as a result of Ivan's influence.
Well, that's beautiful there. And once you mentioned that much of your life has been influenced, if you could just tell us briefly, or as long as you want to, how you met Illich, and how your experience or your this encounter, in a way, made such an impact on you. We meet a lot of people throughout our lifetime, and why Illich was so impactful, in a way, in which way he influenced you.
Well, my first encounter with Illich was when I was in college, training to be a Catholic priest, but doing a degree in science. And his book, Deschooling Society, had just come out, and I read that, and there was a sort of an excitement about the book in the college. So we were all talking a bit about it, and I remember writing an article for the college newspaper on that subject of deschooling education, deschooling society. So from then on, Illich was somebody that was already influencing me. So that's very early on. That's in the 60s. But then much later, I came out here in the 80s into these islands, the Aran Islands, to be a hermit and to try to live a religious life, but in a different way, maybe like the way the monks lived it in the past, the Celtic monks. And but part of what I wanted to do was continue a campaign which I had been running for probably 4 years at the time, sort of critiquing our education system. Because before I came to Aran to live as a hermit, I had been a teacher in a school, and I saw at close hand everything that I didn't like about the system. And before that, I had been reading a lot of other authors, including Illich, about what education should really be like. And I never saw any expression of those inspiring ideas which I found in these writings expressed in the actual system that we were running. So after I left school teaching, I started a campaign to critique the education system and to try and
the national system.
The national system, yeah, especially the secondary system, which is for the teenagers. And the system which, for 6 years, the teenagers focus on just one exam, which we call in Ireland the Leaving Cert. And it's very oppressive, very pressurising, very stressful for young people, and really only measures their academic ability and not so much anything else. So it favours some, and it certainly totally disqualifies others, and it's pretty horrible. So anyway, on one of those years when I was campaigning, I decided we'd run a conference in alternatives in education. And I had a number of key names in mind to open the conference. It was going to be a week-long conference. And I needed some well-known speaker to begin it. So Ivan was one of the names, Paulo Freire was another one of the names.
Wow.
And the third was the Nicaraguan Minister for Education when Nicaragua was newly born by these reforming people.
Yep.
This Nicaraguan Minister of Education was a Jesuit, I believe. But anyway, I wrote to all three of them asking them would they come, and the only one that responded was Ivan.
Really? Paulo Freire didn't respond?
No. And Ivan said, yes, I will come. But then 2 days before we began the conference, he let me know that he couldn't come because a friend of his, I believe it was Eric Fromm, was dying and he was at his bedside.
Wow.
So we had the conference without Ivan. And that was disappointing, but we went on with it. But a year later, I came back into my house. I was running a house of hospitality at the time, and somebody said there was a phone call for you from a man called Ivan. And he said to ring him back on this number. So I said, who do I know that's Ivan? You know, because I didn't think of Ivan Illich. You know, I thought of maybe, somebody in Dublin or somebody. Anyway, I saw it was a Californian phone number, I think it was anyway. Anyway, I rang him and he answered. And he said, I remember you wanted me to come to a conference you were organising in Ireland, and I let you down. And I'm really sorry about that. But I'd come this year. And I say to myself, but the conference is over now. How could that work? Like, he said, well, I will come for 3 days and you do what you want. I'll be at your service for 3 days. So I said, okay, I'll think about it. So I put down the phone and I started to think about it and said, well, sure, Ivan Illich will attract a crowd anywhere, So I got on to a few people, and I was very much helped by a group of academics in Trinity College in Dublin. And they said, we will sponsor his public lecture. He said he would give one public lecture in the course of his visit to Ireland, and that should pay for his whole trip. So that's the way we're going to work. So the Trinity College group organised a lot, paid for his trip, organised a public talk to which about 400 people attended. It was very, very good. Yeah.
In the 80s?
In the 80s, yeah.
That's a big number.
Yeah, he was still very well known. But I met him off the plane, brought him to my mother's house. She gave him a cup of tea and we sat out in the garden. And I said to him, here's what we're going to do for the 3 days. And there was a lot of things going to happen. I had a big itinerary organised. But one of the things was a television interview. And he said to me, but I haven't been on television for 20 years or something. He said, I can't go on television now. Ooh, I said, because I had a lot organised. So I had to ring the poor people who were organising the television programme. They were getting an invited audience to attend it, and it was going to be a really big thing. Yeah, and I had to cancel the whole thing. So we did cancel it. That was okay. It was just one of those things. And I'd also organised the national radio to record a meeting we were going to have in County Clare, in a rural village. And so I told him that. And he said, well, the only way I will allow radio microphones in the audience is I won't speak through a microphone, he said, at all. He says, but if they want to put the microphones somewhere where they can hear me from a distance, like a fly on the wall was his idea, they can do it. So that was, I can go on talking about this occasion for a long, long time. There were so many, many stories in it, but that particular event drew hundreds of people into a tiny village hall. The place was completely packed with people wanting to meet and listen to Ivan Illich. And the local people had organised the local children to dance and to play tin whistles and to sing and all of that. And when Illich saw it set up for him, he said, no, not having any of that. And he didn't that was sort of turning our traditional music and dancing and singing into a performance for tourists. He didn't want any of that. So that was forbidden as well. And then he said, the microphones were up on the hall stand. He was supposed to speak from the top of the hall up on the stage, so that everybody could see him and hear him. He said, "No, I'm not speaking through a microphone." so, so
He's a guest.
Very simple.
no, it was terrible. And so then he said, "So the best thing to do if you're all going to hear me is we'll form a circle." And I would stand in the middle of the circle. Now all the chairs in the hall were facing one way, and it was packed with people. So everybody had to get up off their chair and move their chair around, so that we had a little circle in the middle which he stood in. And the people who were trying to record his talk eventually lay on the floor, flat out, holding a microphone like this and moving it around to try and pick up what he said. And they got 2 radio programs out of it, and it was superb. It was just,
Really?
yeah, because they told the story. It was just so. And in the middle of his talk, he was confronted by some people who didn't agree with him, and he got very angry. And the thing got very heated. It sort of went out of control, because there was a poor man. He was a professor of education from Maynooth University, and he was trying to chair the whole thing, but like it got out of hand altogether. Ivan was nearly hung, drawn and quartered in the middle of this village of Corrafin in County Clare.
Oh my dear.
But a totally memorable occasion that you'll never forget.
I can
Do you know?
only
Oh
imagine,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So that's when I first met Ivan. Then
Wow.
on the 3rd day, I brought him out here to the island, and we had a very peaceful day. And it happened to be the feast of Corpus Christi,
Yes.
and there was a procession in the village holding the what do you call it? Not the ciborium. Oh God, I can't think of the name of it now. Anyway, holding up the host and walking through the village, and he got ecstatic with this, and he took out his rosary beads, which he carried in his pocket, and we walked the procession with the Corpus Christi. Yeah, so that was a good experience for him. And then we came back. We came back off the island. We came out to the island by boat, but we went back on the island by plane because of the timing. And he didn't like me putting him on the plane. He didn't like flying it. He didn't like it. So anyway, I said it was the only way we could organise it. So then we got to Galway, and we went on a train, and that was fine. But there was an incident on the train as well.
Really? What
Yeah.
happened?
Uh,
Several incidents
well, yeah,
for 3
I mean,
days.
yeah, like this was a 2.5, 3-hour journey on the train. And so we had conversations, but then we went quiet, and he took out a book and he started to read the book. And he was in a few pages into the book, and he just dropped it onto the floor. And when we were getting off the train, some of the other people on the train said, "Sir, you've dropped your book. Leave it there. It's not worth picking up again."
Do you remember which book was it?
No, I don't know. That wouldn't be fair to the poor author, but
Indeed.
no, he's that sort of person, very inflammatory or very fiery. You know, his emotion would shoot up in him instantly, and you'd get a blast of it. You know, but I loved him.
Wow.
So that was my first meeting with him, and we got to know each other quite well through those 3 days, because we were together for the 3 days. I was bringing him around to meet different people. And towards the end, when we were saying goodbye, he said, "Now, you come out to Penn State and stay with me for whatever length of time you like. And I have some funding, which we can cover your stay." So that was very nice. So I did. I went out there for 6 weeks, probably about 6 months later. And that was a transformative moment in my life, to live with him at close quarters, to see him lecture in the college, Penn State, and also he had 3 different conversations during the course of the 6 weeks where he gathered together a lot of other writers and thinkers and academics around the table for these amazing conversations. So I have all those conversations in my notes at home, but I said very little myself. I just took notes. I was really like, I was like a scribe, because I didn't feel confident. I didn't come from the right background in my own mind to contribute in the actual conversations. But of course I spoke with a lot of people between the conversation, you know, when we were having meals and stuff like that. So I got to know quite a lot of people, some of whom came to visit here later, and some of whom I've stayed in touch with all the time. So it was a very, very rich experience for me.
Is this when you meet Lee?
Yeah, this is when I met Lee.
This is when you meet
Yeah,
Lee.
yeah. So so after that then, we organised a conversation here in the house where you're staying, Killaney Lodge, and Ivan and Lee and some other people. I'm trying to think of some people's names now, but yeah, maybe he came with two or three other people, and then we gathered people from Ireland as well, and we had this conversation over 3 days with him. So that was his second visit. And one of the things that happened there was that we had that conversation over the Halloween weekend. So, and Halloween here is a festival where it's not just the children who dress up, it's the adults who dress up.
Nice.
And it's the sort of manifestation of this myth, this Celtic myth, that on the last day of the Celtic year, and especially the night which links that year with the beginning of the next year, which is what Halloween used to be, there's a thin line, there's a thin veil between our world and the other world where all these other creatures live. So when you dress up, you are representing these other creatures. So our conversation was over. We all went down to the pub, and half of the people in the pub were dressed up. So it was this weird thing. But then another strange thing happened. We were told that somebody had gone missing, and they feared he had committed suicide.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it turned out he had.
Wow.
So that was Halloween night. Like all that energy was there. Do you know? It was, and I knew that person very well. Well, not very well, but certainly I knew that person well enough. And it turned out that he had left where he was staying in the main village of the island, and he had told people he was going up to see me in my house. That's where they thought he had gone. That's where they came to me to see if I had seen him. But I wasn't in my house. I was in Killaney Lodge at the conversation. So there's nobody in my house. So then everybody was worried, and they then discovered that he had gone to the cliffs and jumped over the edge. So that was all part of that conversation. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah.
Very intense.
Very intense. Yeah. So that was the second time he came to Ireland with me, and then the third time he came to stand as a godfather for my daughter. Well, I had two daughters, twins, so they were both being christened on the same day. He didn't have to come to the island for that because we had the ceremony in Glendalough in County Wicklow.
Oh, okay.
So there are the three occasions, and then of course I visited him in Bremen almost every year.
Wow.
When he came there. Yeah.
So the 3 times he was in Ireland are these stories
these stories that I'm sharing with you now.
sharing with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you met him in Penn State, in the United States, or in Bremen, in Germany.
Yeah, I only went once to Penn State, but that was 6 weeks. But then almost every year I went to Bremen when he was there. Yeah.
And also in Penn State would be in the university teaching, but also in these gatherings around the table.
I got
like
both.
Doing both.
Yes. And what was interesting was in Penn State, and he told me this himself, when he would teach a course in Penn State, first of all, the authorities couldn't tell him what course he had to teach. He wasn't just going to be given a module with a name and saying, oh, you teach that module.
I see.
He would only agree if he was allowed to say whatever he wanted and do whatever he wanted. So that was the first thing. So he was in Penn State on those conditions. But secondly, when he would open the session, the first module, the first lecture, he would say to the students there, now, any students here who simply want to get their marks for completing the module, and some very foolish students would put their hand up, and he'd say, right, you've got your marks, go. I don't want you here again. He only wanted people who were motivated and interested.
To have conversations.
Yeah. And then the third thing was, I didn't attend all his lectures, but I attended some of them. Most of the people attending were not students at all, they were staff.
Wow.
Yeah, he was attracting the staff to his lectures, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was a very extraordinary person.
And how was the atmosphere of these gatherings, both in Penn State and Bremen?
Oh, the conversations?
Yeah. Because in Penn State, if I'm not mistaken, was much more inside the university, right? Inside,
no. These conversations took place in a house which he had rented.
Penn State also in a house.
Yeah, in which house we had rented.
Okay.
Yeah. So the atmosphere there was wonderful because they were all from an academic background, but they were cooking meals together, having breakfast together. You know, there was nobody, there was no staff looking after us. We all had to help to get everything done, and people were sleeping everywhere, on couches, on the mattress on the floor. I was farmed out to a neighbour who volunteered to take 1 or 2 people. So it was lovely. It was just very exciting, and the conversations themselves were so inspiring, because these were experts in their field, and it was amazing.
And how there, little by little, your own thoughts and your own ideas in your own search resonated with Illich, because you mentioned that many of these conversations were from a background that was not necessarily the one you were coming from. But how did it come that you shared a bit of the schooling?
Yeah.
But I don't know if there's more.
Yes, there is more. I think what attracted me to Ivan was that I intuited that these systems, these institutions which were in my life, education and the church in particular, let's say, and both of them, I intuited that both of them were very manipulative and depowering of people. And then I read Illich, and I talked to Illich, and we had these conversations, and I began to see that he had found a way to name it and to write about it. So that brought it much more into my awareness and into my consciousness, and it actually confirmed what I already knew.
Yeah.
So I already knew that there was something wrong with the schooling system, but he managed to give me much clearer ideas of what was wrong with them. And the same, I knew already from an early stage in my life that there was something wrong with the church. I wanted to be a priest. I wanted to live a spiritual life. I wanted to be of service to others in spiritual area. But then I came into the institution, and they had all these other rules and regulations and dogmatic teachings, some of which I didn't agree with. So there's a huge amount within the church that I already had problems with. And so I ended up being a Catholic priest. Ivan ended up being a Catholic priest, so there was a lot in common there between us as well, you know. So, I mean, one of the biggest influences, of course, was that when I had my own children, they grew up without schooling. Until they chose to go to school themselves, which was when they were about 15 or 16, for 3 of them, and the 4th one went a little bit earlier. Yeah.
I would like to ask you, what do you think that gave Ivan Illich this ability of seeing institutions or seeing these structures and feeling like that's something weird about it? Like, do you have any guess what gave him this possibility of looking at those things and really finding something was not quite there?
Well, I think it probably came gradually for Ivan. I mean, he spent a lot of time in the education system himself as a student. He has, I think, a number of doctorates. So he spent a long time within the system. But I think there was always something inside him that was rebellious. Like he told this story himself, that he would sometimes sit an exam for somebody else, and they would get the marks, but he would have done all the exam for them, you know. He was a rebel from the start, you know, so he wasn't going to be comfortable, I think, with being closed in or being limited. And when he sort of fully matured as an adult, and began to work first of all in Puerto Rico, I think. No, first of all in Manhattan. And then in Puerto Rico. All these ideas that were sort of seeds in his youth. And these, if you like, rebellious seeds or wanting to look at things differently, began to come out and manifest. You know, a lot of it was his own search, I think, because I think, if I remember correctly, he did a lot of wandering, we would call it here, because the Irish monks used to wander too. But even when Illich was in Puerto Rico, I'm not sure about when he was in Manhattan, he often went off and just, you know, down to South America and wandered. And that's a wonderful thing for finding out who you really are and what you really want to do with your life. And I think he, as a person, he he is very inspirational because he stayed true to who he really was at quite enormous cost to him, really. Like, he became very famous in the early stages of his adult life, but then that fame sort of receded. But he wasn't interested in the fame. That didn't bother him, you know. He was very true to who he really was and what his work really was about, and he really didn't tolerate anybody who tried to push him in another direction, which I found really great. He was very true to his own principles. I think that's what I admired most about him. Like, he wouldn't allow a television in the house, any house that he was in. Yeah. They used to lease a car in Bremen and share it together. So he didn't have any property of his own. He really was a sort of an itinerant preacher, I think, using the whole world as his home, you know. And he had friends everywhere.
Yes.
And that's what he valued most, was friendship, more than anything else, I think, just friendship. And hospitality, very central to his life. And he practiced it himself. You know, he's a very hospitable person, very obliging, very thoughtful, very compassionate, and would go out of his way, like he did for me. He was coming to Europe for his winter sojourn, and when I asked him would he stand as a godparent for my daughter, he said okay. He said, we will divert. Instead of flying directly to Germany, we will fly to Ireland, and then we'll fly on from Ireland to Germany. So that's how we did it. We arranged the date to suit him, and that all worked. But he was that sort of person, very obliging.
In that sense, there is this something that we smelled hearing stories about Illich, is that many, if not most, of his concepts and ideas come from a way of living, in a way.
Yeah.
And one could also even say that there is a complementarity between his work and his biography, his life, his lifestyle, the way he chose to live. What do you think that is at the center of this complementarity? And if you have witnessed that?
Well, Ivan used to say, well, first of all, he didn't like modernity. And that was really the focus of his critique, all the different aspects of modernity. So in order not to be part of it, he used to often say, inside myself, I live in the 12th century. The 12th century is a comfortable place for me to be in, so I'm happy there. So it's from the perspective of the 12th century that I look at modernity. So he's outside the bubble, which I think is necessary. If you're going to critique something in today's world, you have to stand outside of it. You can't really critique it if you're in the middle of it. I can't really critique schooling if I'm a teacher in the school. I'm too caught up in so many things. So, and it's the same with the church. You know, I couldn't really critique the church until I left it, even though I was trying to critique it while I was within it. So he took this position of sort of, in his mind, living in the 12th century and looking at modernity from that point of view. And I think when you do something like that, you begin to see things that nobody else sees, because we just take them for granted. But if you stand outside the bubble and look in, you see all the different key energies that are moving within that bubble, that are causing people to live in a certain way and say certain things and have a lifestyle that's dictated by this bubble. And I think that helped him to see that that modernity is it's a distortion. It's not natural. It's in our. I don't know what words he would use, but these are my words. You know, that there's a more natural way to live, and he found it in indigenous peoples, and he found it in ancient traditions and ancient cultures, and that's what he tried to promote. And so, you know,
in a way you found in the Celtic tradition.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I found it in the Celtic tradition. Exactly. Yeah. So, like where he would stand in the 12th century, that would be a totally wrong place for me to stand. Because the 12th century in Ireland was the first time we were fully colonised and oppressed by an outside agency, a country. You know, we were attacked by the Normans in the 12th century, and we lost our sovereignty and our freedom. And from then on, we were an oppressed people, and our culture and our heritage, everything was suppressed. So that wouldn't be a good time for me to stand in, you know. So
Yes, indeed.
where I like to stand is in the 7th and 8th century, when the monastic movement in Ireland had reached its peak. We call it our golden age. And that particular way of life within the monasteries, which affected everybody in society, not just the monasteries. Monasteries were sort of a core energy point in the middle of a wide community. So everybody was affected by it. And these monasteries, when they reached their golden age, they were producing all these wonderful works that we still admire now on our landscape, like the Celtic crosses, or in our museums, like the metalwork and the Book of Kells. You know, all these famous artifacts came out of that period. So it wasn't simply a way of living spiritually that produced our golden age. It was a manifestation of Irish creativity at its best in all the different ways one can do that. So everything blossomed, everything flourished, and it was a most remarkable place. And I feel if you achieve it once, you can achieve it again. Why not?
Yes.
So that's what I hope for. So that's my platform. I stand in the golden age of Ireland to look at the world. So not too far from, I don't have too much of a different perspective from Ivan. But yeah, I see it, like he had a global vision, and my vision is more Irish, I think. I mean, we can influence the globe, we can influence the global world, but I feel, and this is something I don't think I learned from Ivan, I learned from somebody though, that if you want to change the world, you don't go out as missionaries to preach this message to the whole world, because you're just forcing people to take on something that's not natural to them. I believe that if you want to change the world, you first change yourself. You live, a bit like what Gandhi said, you live the vision that you have for maybe other people, but if you can't practice it yourself, what's the point? So you live it for yourself, and in the course of living it for yourself, other people see it, and maybe they too will join you, or they will do the same thing. So that's my approach to things. So I feel that if Ireland can root itself back in its own heritage and begin to live in that way again, insofar as we can in today's world, that will not alone transform our society, but it will begin to send out waves to the whole world, as it did in those times.
As it did, yeah.
Yeah.
In this way, you think Illich was somehow talking about a way of living, not only a thinking, or you feel like he was promoting or trying to invite people to live in a certain way, or was more the consequence, as you said, of being close to someone that was living?
I think maybe that was part of his being drawn to me. I was drawn to him because of his ideas, and then when I met him, of course, I began to love him as a person. But I think he maybe was drawn to me because, first of all, when he met me, I was still a Catholic priest. So there was that resonance there. But also, my whole focus in coming to live here was to find a way of living. And I think probably he could never have done that, because he thought of himself as an itinerant preacher, or whatever word he used, but itinerant certainly. So like he practiced not owning anything and not really living anywhere, you know? I mean...
so you invited him to live here?
No, I never invited him to live here, but I think he was drawn to a person who was trying to manifest a way of life. Rooted in a place, yeah.
Because as you were saying, his way was
travelling.
Part moon, part travelsman in the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think I was living out an aspect of his dream here, and that's what he liked. Yeah.
And since you met him as a priest, did you ever talk or corresponded about you leaving the church? Did you renouncing the priesthood? Did you actually exchange conversations or ideas about that?
No. Funny, I don't think so, no. I don't even remember telling him that I had left the church, but I'm sure I did tell him, but it obviously wasn't a very memorable event. He didn't explode, or he didn't get angry, or he didn't even seem interested, so, you know, it wasn't an event. He took it for granted. I mean, very soon after that, we had 3 or 4 children, and he came and became a godfather to one of them, you know, so obviously it wasn't an issue for him. But I do remember the first time he came to Ireland and with me, he came to the island, and we had a mass. I was still a priest, and part of his visit, we scheduled sort of sit around in a circle and have a form of the Eucharist. And I asked him, first of all, would he like to participate? Yes, he would like to participate. Would you like to concelebrate and, you know, express your priesthood in this? No, he would not want to do that. But there was another interesting expression of his priesthood, I think, at the christening of our daughters. Because by the time I had my children, obviously I had left the church, and I had let loose a lot of my ideas about theology and so on. So even though I wanted a christening, I didn't particularly want it to be a sort of a standard format of a christening, traditional. So we weren't necessarily interested in having the exact words of the baptism said. You know, I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, which I had learned in theology that unless you say the words, the child will not be baptized. You know, you must say the words. I didn't say the words, and neither did anybody else. And Ivan got a bit upset about that.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And he said the words in Latin. Yeah, over the daughter that is now his godchild. Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
So she is baptized formally. Yeah.
But it's funny how this rebel
Exactly.
thing, but also this rooted thing in something that is also seen from outside.
Exactly.
That's really
yeah, that's right.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And he had that connection with the church all of his life. You know, he never really, I mean, he resigned as a priest, but he was never not a priest in his own mind. And he was never outside the church in his own mind either. Whereas I am definitely outside the church. So we're different in that way.
Yeah.
And his, you know, it would have been his wish, I think, to have had a mass for his funeral, which he got. And it was in Latin, which he liked. Yeah.
Why do you think that? And I don't know if it's the same for you now with this Celtic tradition. If you see that it's important to root oneself, even if it's for stepping out of something, it's important to have roots in it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's clear, but it's.
For me, that's right. But then, where were his roots? Do you know? So everybody has to speak for themselves. But in the Irish tradition, which I feel so at home in, you have this idea of a young person thinking of themselves as a monk, whether they're a man or a woman, doesn't matter. And according to the tradition, when they grow into a young adult, they need to go off and wander, find out who they are, learn about the world, and find out what their place is in the world. And they're expected in that wandering at some point to find what they called their place of resurrection. And when you find that, then you put down your roots. So for many Irish monks, men and women, they put down roots far away from where they had grown up. You know, so we're sitting here at the Church of St. Kieran. He was a young monk this was his first place during his wandering, and he stayed here for 7 years. And he created this monastic community. But then after the 7 years, the community went on living here, but he left. And he went to another place, which then became his place of resurrection. And he created a monastery there, and it's still a place of great fame, a place called Clonmacnoise, on the River Shannon. So, and he's a typical example of this young wandering monk who at some point in his or her life finds their place. And then when they do, if they're correct about it, if they have felt it correctly and intuited it correctly, their life just flourishes and blossoms, and they do amazing things, far more than would ever be expected. And hundreds of years later, even thousands of years later, people are still remembering that person and talking about them.
Wow.
Which is the case about many of these Irish folks who travelled all over Europe. I think when somebody like Ivan contributes to the world in the way he did through ideas, he plants seeds, and it's only after his death that the seeds begin to grow. And in a way, the fruits of those particular seeds are not necessarily what he was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's moved beyond him, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's in this sense, what do you think could be some of Illich's ideas or concepts that would be helpful today in the if we can say that, like, in the moment we live as society, if there is such a thing, or we should look for smaller group of people. But if you see something that it would be very important to bring today, or it will be like in a fertile moment to come, do you have some?
Yes. I think the key contribution which I see Ivan making to the world is to stand back from the world that you've been born into and observe it from a distance and see all the energies and structures and institutions which are pushing you in a certain direction. Like, the common idea in Ireland for any young person growing up is that they get educated, as Ivan would say, eat their educational sausages, get their certificates, go into a job, which is part of a corporation or an institution or maybe the state, then buy a house by borrowing a mortgage, which you will then spend 25 or 30 years repaying, and that's a real noose around your neck. And then live a life that's totally dictated to you by the society in which you live, without ever questioning it.
For you to regain this new world beyond the certainties and beyond the institutions, you have to renounce a world.
Yeah. You have to
Maybe
renounce
that's
the word. Yeah, and that's very difficult maybe for the average person to do. You know, I was probably from my own childhood and my own, the influence especially of my father, but obviously my mother didn't oppose it. My father lived in the conventional world for 9 months of the year. He worked as a civil servant, so he's right in the middle of the institution. And we lived in a typical suburban house, so all very mainstream. But then, from our early childhood, he had leased a piece of land on a beach out in the countryside, and he put a caravan on it first, and then he put an old rickety house on it, which he bought for nothing. And we would spend June, July and August living there. Going to school for part of it, but most of it were for school holidays. And we would get up in the morning and you'd just put on a pair of shorts, no shoes, no sandals, out onto the beach. And you spend the day on the beach, maybe with a t-shirt on you. And, you know, it was very simple living, no luxuries, simple food. And I think that taught me so much, that that's the way I want to live, not the other way. We had the two houses, but none of us, I have 6 siblings. Of the 7 of us, when my parents died, none of us had any nostalgia for the suburban house, and we sold it instantly. Whereas everybody, to a person, was 100% in favour of keeping the summer house, which is probably not worth very little on the market except for its location. But the building itself is made up of scraps, and everything in it is second hand, or nothing of value in the material world, but everything of value in the spiritual world. So I think maybe my father sowed those seeds in me when I was young. He used to bring us camping out in the wilds all the time, living very simply, cooking food on a small stove. That's where I learned really those values from him, probably.
We now face, and you wrote that in your book, we now face climate change and biodiversity loss across the world.
Yes.
And this is a worldwide crisis, if you want. That one feels very much overwhelmed by its scale in terms of actually being able to do something meaningful that can change the outcome of something that has enormous complications. What's your thoughts on that, and how would you see Illich's concepts helping, feeding, encouraging, enlightening people to face this crisis?
Well, I think Ivan was always conscious of the disaster that was unfolding in the environment. And I think he had an influence on the Green movement and the Green political movement. Even while I was there in Bremen, was it in Bremen? It was on one of the occasions anyway, that it might have been actually in Penn State. But on one of the occasions I was there, the house that we were in was visited by a number of the Green Party elected members from Germany, which was quite a powerful party in Germany at the time. So, there was a very direct connection between what Ivan was saying and what the Green Party were trying to create through their policies. So I suppose Ivan has his ideas, unfold into so many different aspects of life. And one of those areas where he has had a strong influence is in the whole green movement, and certainly that would be true for me as well. That his ideas are very much probably have shaped me and formed me, and motivated me to get into this work. That it's not just to be thinking theoretically of problems that are in the world, but actually facing some of the most serious ones and finding a way to respond positively to it. So what we say here is that our energy cooperative was founded in response to the climate and biodiversity crisis. That's how we explain how we came about. And we say in our constitution that we want to be proactive rather than reactive. So we want to, if you like, get ahead of the problem, and to be positive about, rather than be victims of climate change or biodiversity loss, to see this whole challenge that's in front of us as actually an opportunity for us to live better, to live higher quality lives, to live more connected to the rest of nature, and to have a different relationship to the environment that we live in, rather than the one we have at the moment, which is very much consumer oriented. So a lot of that thinking would be in line with what Ivan was thinking as well.
And following up with these ideas and thoughts, what's the place or the role of spirituality in that?
For me,
for you,
the role of spirituality is absolutely central. I wouldn't be doing this work if I wasn't on a spiritual path. And the source of my energy for this work is my spirituality. And, I say whenever I get the opportunity that the solution to the climate change and biodiversity crisis will only be fully understood when we understand that it's not just a question of getting rid of oil and replacing it with clean fuels. It's a question of our spiritual relationship to everything around us and everybody around us. And that's what's been wrong ultimately. And that's part of what my book is about, is to say that, you know, the concept that we have had of God or of the divine has contributed to the problem, because it is an image of the divine as authoritarian, as male, as very removed from the actual environment in which we live, whereas we can reconceive all of that as like what I say is that, what are we talking about when we talk about the divine? I say we're talking about your experience of the magic and mystery of life, and we can experience that every day in different forms. Something is wonderful, something is amazing. Whenever you say words like that, you're experiencing something in a way that's beyond you. And that's, for me, that's your open door into the divine. That's what the divine, I'm not saying that's what the divine is, because I don't think we can define it, but they are the manifestations of the divine all around you in your life. And if you begin to reshape your life so that you live in that way, that you're living you're living in an environment of mystery. Like John O'Donoghue in one of his writings says, may you live in the presence of wonder. And that's, for me, what it's all about, to notice and understand and experience and be present to the amazingness of the universe that we live in and the environment that we live in. And maybe it's easy for me living in a place like the Aran Islands, but we have to try to find that there are amazing things living in a city as well. You have the flower growing in the pot on your windowsill, or whatever it is, the child in your family. Like, there's so many sources for wonder and for mystery that it's only when you begin to practice noticing it and valuing it that you'll begin to see that it actually is everywhere. And that's a whole new way to live.
Then my last question, Dara, to close this wonderful time together, is who was Ivan Illich for you?
Ivan Illich, first of all, was a gift to me that I didn't ask for, but that I fully appreciate as best I can. What a gift it was to know somebody like him, because everybody is unique and everybody is extraordinary, but there was something that Ivan had that very few people had. And I think it's true that anybody who got to know Ivan, certainly in the way that I did, felt they were touching something that was totally exceptional. So Ivan he's a gift to me, but he's a gift to so many other people as well, even like yourselves. You've never met him in person. And my hope and my dream would be that, you know, that people will experience the gift that he has given to us, even in the future. And your work is going to help to do that, which is great. Now, just looking back on my life, you know, knowing Ivan was one of the biggest blessings that I could have received in my life. To know him personally, I got to know him by reading his books, but to actually get to know him and become a friend, and to have that reciprocated, it was just beyond anything I could have dreamed or imagined or wanted to achieve, you know, myself. It's just something that happened, so it's a total gift. It's a grace that I've received, and I fully appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dara.
Thank you.
It's a gift to be here. You are one of the first friends of Illich with whom I corresponded with.
Yeah, and that surprises me, because I was a very late friend of his.
Exactly.
You know, yeah. He was already in his 60s when I met him.
Yeah. It was through Lee's calendar. His daughter Beth, that I came across you, and to finally be able to share this gift that you mentioned. It's for me a blessing as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for sharing it with me as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I don't feel equal to him in any way. So that's partly why I feel it as such a wonderful gift. You know, what is it that allowed that connection to be made between he who was so wonderful in a certain way and I never felt anyway a match for anything that he was doing. You know, so you know, it's that sense of being humbled as well by the gift. You know.
That if we could ask one thing that's very strong about this meeting, of this friendship that is stuck to you, if you can say one thing from the, if it's possible, from this encounter, one thing that keeps on you very strongly until nowadays.
I think, like I've learned that in our tradition, it's probably important for you to try to find somebody who can be your, what we call your anam cara, your soul friend. And I would see that the two of you are soul friends, and I'm a soul friend with Tess, that's for sure. So we've all got that gift. But then there's another gift that maybe not too many people get, and it's the gift of knowing somebody that has brought this amazing, unique contribution to the world through their own lives. And for me, that was Ivan. For my wife, it was Carl Jung. Now, she never knew Carl Jung, but I had the privilege of knowing Ivan. So that's doubly special. And I think that must be the same for anybody who knows, you know, somebody of that caliber, of that quality. They must all experience it as a wonderful gift, something very unique and precious. Yeah. So there's a song that we sing here quite regularly in our ceremonies that sort of expresses that idea of going with the flow. I'm going to sing it for you, right?
Please.
The river is flowing, growing and flowing. The river is flowing down to the sea. Mother, won't you carry me? Your child I will always be. Mother, won't you carry me down to the sea?